The Stomouth Extension had been open for 1 month, and the board of directors had already started to see favourable returns on their investment. The Stomouth Seaside Express had proved an instant hit, and many early holiday makers from all over the country had already taken advantage of the easier and quicker travel to the relatively unknown area. The real moneymaker was freight, and the heavy freight flows to and from the docks were proving extremely lucrative, especially those for the Royal Navy at Her Majesty's Naval Base, Stomouth. Arthur and Vaughan were enjoying the strain of these freight flows, however the local passenger services were suffering as a result. Short-term cancellations and extra stops being required to be made by the Stomouth Seaside Express were starting to frustrate the residents of Fulbrook and Eldridge, who couldn't rely on the service enough to use it daily. Enough was enough, and Lord Stovell once again found himself begging the Western region for the loan of a locomotive. He didn't like doing it, but he had no other choice, short of working his current fleet into the ground. One rainy afternoon, Lord Stovell could be found at Oxford Sheds, begging one of his old friends to see what he could do for him. "I'm desperate, James. I just can't run my fleet into the dirt. I've got villagers up in arms about my railway service that 2 months ago they didn't even have. I got freight contracts pouring out my ears, but nothing to ease the strain on passenger flows." "Monty, my dear boy, I completely understand, but we here at Oxford barely have enough locomotives to cover our own trains, let alone allow you to use one." "There has to be a way, James. Anything?" "I really don't know, Monty." "Oh, wait, hang on. I think I may have just the thing. One of my colleagues in Leamington mentioned something to me in a letter last week. I'll chase it up and see where it leads." "Oh, James, you're a lifesaver." "I'm only doing it because it's you. Now go. I'll let you know sometime this week if I've been successful for you." Lord Stovell walked away and began his journey back home to the Stovell Valley. He addressed the engines at Stowborough Sheds that evening. "Therefore, I am just waiting for my contact at British Railways to come back to me, then I'll know either way. I can only apologise to you all for the added pressure, work and stress this last month has brought to you, and I just have to thank you all for being so patient with myself and the board of directors as we tried to sort the mess out. It's more than alright, sir. We really do understand. I just wish there was more we could do as a current team, but it seems like an impossible task. We're working flat out as it is. I'm really hoping this lead comes through. We need something or we're really going to be in trouble. The next option is to start running freight and passenger trains jointly. Obviously that won't be good for publicity, but if it comes to that to ensure our service runs, then it may have to happen." The engines looked glum. They really didn't know what to suggest. "If you need any help with pulling trains, I may be able to do it. I know I'm slow, but at least I'll be able to run some sort of train. Really appreciate the gesture, Jack. But your speed really lets you down, as well as the fact you're vitally important here at Stowborough to shunt. It was just a suggestion, sir. I do understand." The days passed without any word from British Railways. Fulbrook and Eldridge services continued to dwindle, cut down to just one train in each direction as express and freight took priority. There was another week before Lord Stovell finally got the news he was looking for. His friend had managed to make a deal with someone at Leamington Spa, and they had sorted the loan of an engine. The next morning, Lord Stovell was waiting with Earl at Retford Sheds for the new arrival. "Earl, I'd like you to show this new engine the ropes. He'll need to know the entire line and where to find his coaches and the likes." "Yes, sir." "Excellent. When he arrives, we'll organise a path for you and him to go up in convoy. His revenue-earning work will begin tomorrow." Shortly, a loud whistle could be heard at the entrance to the shed complex, and backing down towards them was a large black tank engine. Under the grime and soot that covered him, they could just make out his number, 4118. "Good morning, Oliver, sir. Ollie for short." "Good morning, Ollie. Welcome to the Stovell Valley Railway." "Thank you, sir." "Obviously too busy with British Railways to get a good clean. That's what I like to see. Hard work." Ollie laughed nervously. "Yeah, that's right, sir. Well, you'll fit right in here. All my engines are extremely hard working. Apart from that bloody Hawthorne Leslie." "What Hawthorne Leslie?" "That's nothing for you to worry about." Lord Stovell regained his composure. "Right, now, down to business. I have no idea how much you know about what your work will be whilst you're here with us, so I shall explain our predicament. We have recently opened an extension of our line down to the seaside town of Fort Stomouth, with 2 intermediate stations. Currently, bulk freight and express duties are having to take precedence over local services that were call at Fulbrook and Eldred. So you want me to run these local services? By Jove, you've got it! Have an OBE! No thanks, I just put one out. Fine, suit yourself. Anyway, yes, you should be running these services, which will take a considerable strain off my other engines to help them run existing services. My colleagues are currently drawing up a new timetables for the upcoming timetable change, which should hopefully further solve our problems. For now, Earl here will be taking you down to Fort Stomouth to show you the road. Okay sir, thank you very much for this opportunity. Lord Stovell smiled and turned away before Ollie and Earl disappeared down the line. Earl showed Ollie all the sights as well as telling him the operational information, including the braking points, speed limit changes and signals. They soon arrived in Fort Stomouth where they stopped to talk. So what do you think of the line? Well, it certainly makes a change from the flat main line from Paddington to Oxford. Lots of nice gradients, and I must say the scenery is absolutely fantastic. Bit of a hidden gem here, and it's all ours. Aye, can't wait to get stuck in tomorrow. I'm so glad we've got you. Hopefully from now on the shifts will be a lot easier on us. Oh, you never know, this upcoming timetable change might help that. I'd say so. Last time we had a timetable change it worked out in my favour. I got a longer break between trains, but somehow also allowed for more trains to run. You work out the logic there. I wouldn't argue with that. More rest is something we could only dream of on the Thames Valley routes. Passenger numbers are increasing, our timetables are more intense. Got quite a lot for us all. Well, I hope you enjoy the slower pace of life here. It will be interesting to see how you fare on the gradients. I've never ventured this far west before. It'd be like a working holiday. Earl laughed before he bade Ollie farewell so he could go continue his afternoon's work. Ollie remained in Fort Stomouth sheds for the rest of the day. He was joined by Dan, eventually, who had brought some coaches down to the yard for Ollie to use the next day. 2 engines bonded very quickly, primarily over their western heritage, but also because they were the only 2 tank engines working on the railway. I feel overlooked sometimes, just because I don't have a tender and don't charge around the railway at 1,000,000 miles an hour. Really can't comment at charging around all over the place. I find myself doing that more than often these days. But I know exactly how you feel regarding the bunker fiasco. You, having been based at the Oak, must have seen some of the same whilst working there. Specialist branches of the GWCPS split off and found a rather nice home there. Some of the larger 460s decided that all engines that didn't hold trains with at least a lamp over each buffer weren't worth talking to, and the main one, the tender tank divide, it was just getting so toxic. We should stand together, not bicker. United we stand, divided we fall. What would Churchwood think? The once proud and mighty Great Western Fleet reduced to a bunch of arguing supremacists. Well, let's make a deal right here, right now. We'll look after each other. Tanks before tenders, eh? Bunkers first. Now that sounds like a plan to me. It's definitely cheered me up to no end. Ollie and Dan settled down for the night, Dan comforted by the friend he'd made in the newcomer. They woke up the next morning when their crews arrived to get them ready for the day's work. Dan headed away towards the docks where he would collect the first set down goods service of the day. Ollie waited for his signal to drop and then hauled his coaches into the station. A few people were scattered along the platform, but there wasn't as much as Ollie had expected. He departed, taking in all the sights of the line as the early morning sun illuminated the ground. He was soon arriving at Eldridge, where a couple of people got on and got off. The same was true at Fulbrook. He ran into Stovell, where the passengers disembarked and headed off to their places of work within the town. He shunted his coaches into the opposite platform and got himself to the head of the train once more. As he was waiting for his departure, Dan sedately passed through the station, smiling and wishing him luck as he did so. The days passed, and Ollie continued his work, mostly isolated from the other engines. Earl and Dan saw him the most, but he had also had a brief visit from Ed one night, who was genuinely interested in the passenger numbers on the line. "So, how are you coping with the adoring crowds of passengers, Ollie?" "I wouldn't call them crowds, to be honest with you. I've been running this line for 4 days now, and I haven't really seen more than an entire trainload of passengers in a day. 6 coaches is a tad overkill. It's a shame, there's so much potential. Just give it time. You watch. It's Saturday tomorrow. You might find holidaymakers wanting to make a visit." Ollie didn't seem convinced, but he was willing to be open-minded about the situation. The conversation dwindled as the 2 engines became more tired. They both soon fell asleep. They were rudely woken up by the sound of people talking the next morning. There was a large group of people nearby, but they couldn't place where, until their crews came to prepare them for work. "I say, driver, what on earth is that racket?" "It's the passengers on the station." "But 5 people can't make that kind of racket." Ed's driver laughed. "5? More like 500. 500? What on earth for?" "Beats me. It's even odder when most of them aren't on the express platform. They're all on the local platform." Ed looked across to Ollie with a look of smugness etched on his smokebox. They both set off to collect their coaches and were soon simmering at the heads of their respective trains. "Think you'd need the Great Bear to pull this lot." "Don't be silly, you'll be fine." The passengers were happily scurrying into their coaches. Ollie recognised the regular commuters as they clambered aboard with what could only be assumed was their families. Ed departed 5 minutes later with the Stomouth Seaside Express, which looked empty compared to the packed coaches behind Ollie. Ollie waited for his signal to drop before he then followed Ed towards Stowborough. The change of weight of his coaches was very apparent. He enjoyed the challenge of the newly heavy train. Passengers disembarked and got on at Eldridge, where they could start walks to the summit of Stow Tor. Passengers did much the same when he arrived at Fulbrook. They could take long walks around the lake nearby, as well as guided tours of the flooded 19th century village on its banks. Stowborough beckoned and the final passengers alighted, keen to get started taking in the sights of the town. This continued for the rest of the day, and Sunday as well. Ollie could hardly keep to his special summer weekend timetable and often went without a rest at the end of each journey just to make the return trip. To celebrate his success that weekend, he decided to join the other engines at Stowborough Sheds for the evening. I must say, Ollie, it's been great to see the passenger numbers increase this weekend. You brought a magic touch to the line. Hear, hear. It's been a pleasure to see and hear the passengers enjoying themselves. Finally, freight had to take a back step for our passenger service. That's a first to the extension. Well, yes, but an intense weekend timetable doesn't really lend itself quite so well to the passage of freight trains as well. Although I don't mind, I could manage the longer loads quite easily, and Dan here was quite content on his pickup goods too. See, tank engines can be useful. I never said they weren't. Bunker first, Dan, don't worry. Dan calmed down at these words and began to talk about his pickup goods. He finished his story, but Ollie looked sad. What's up, Ollie? Well, tomorrow we'll be back to the same old rubbishy passenger count as last week. 3 people in each coach, maybe a parcel in the guards area. Well, not necessarily, mate. There's a lot to be said for your weekend service. It's a beacon for the extension. People will want to use it for commuting now, as well as their leisure travel on the weekends. I hope you're right, Stan. Be a shame to see the patronage dwindle to those pathetic figures again. Well, I'm sure they won't, my dear engine. I'll find out in the morning anyway. Talking of the morning, better get back to Fort Stomouth. Need to be in a position for the first train tomorrow. Well, good luck and keep the faith. We're more than sure you'll be pleasantly surprised. Oh, and before you go, can you do me a favour and take a brake van with you down to the yard at Fort Stomouth? Oh, will do, absolutely, no problem. Ollie left the sheds and collected the brake van before he departed for Fort Stomouth. He felt the early night's wind against his smokebox as he ran along the sweeping downward gradients. He was really hoping the other engines were right and that his passengers would continue to come and use his services. He backed into the sheds where he was still pondering this conundrum. He fell asleep hoping he'd be pleasantly surprised in the morning.